Hi guys, let's talk a little bit about practicing of presence. We hear these newfangled words. Most people have heard the term mindfulness. We certainly have heard a lot about how meditation is good for us, but we don't necessarily hear as much is the how and why and the science and what are the contraindications? So in other words, when is it bad to meditate in different ways as well? So that's one of the things that we do here is we educate people on a lot of different variations on how to be present. And we want to step back just a moment and kind of understand some of the science, because what we knew 40, 50 years ago is not the same compared to what we know now. Like we have now taken people through, for example, mindfulness-based stress reduction is one particular way of practicing presence. That's an 8-week course that has pre and post fMRI brain scans that show what actually goes on inside the skull, before and after people have trained their brain in this particular way. And what we're noticing is we can actually map an increase of gray matter, specifically in the prefrontal cortex and areas associated with executive functioning, emotional regulation, self-referential systems. We see a decrease of white matter around the amygdala, which is associated with how we process inhibition, fear, pain, these type of things. So white matter is connective tissue. Connective tissue means our reactions, our triggers in a lot of ways. So what we're physically doing is we're learning that there is a way that we can condition our brain on a daily basis and basically physically do brain surgery of adding and subtracting of different types of brain matter tissue in order to begin the way we even see and hold reality can begin shifting. So we can do brain surgery with the power of our mind. I don't know if that isn't cool to you. I geek out a little bit about that. So if you're struggling, if you're suffering, human beings, we have this really amazing advanced memory and this really amazing advanced imagination. And that advanced imagination, especially, it allows us to be in an abstract version of reality. We have the ability to go into a future state of suffering or future state and, kind of abstractly be in that place, as well as rehash and be in an abstract version of the past. And we can even be in an abstract version of now, where we're thinking about what everybody's saying and doing and thinking without really knowing actually, it's called mind reading, really knowing what's actually going on. So this abstract ability of comparison analysis, of course, as human beings, it allows us to do so many wonderful things as far as control our environment, but it's kind of a double-edged sword because it also, when we get stuck in that, for example, if we're in a future state of suffering, well, neurons that fire together wire together. So our brain literally begins wiring itself to believe it's already in a future state of suffering. So how easy is it going to be to get to a future state of happiness if we currently are working with the brain that already believes that it's wired together to be a future brain of suffering? So you can kind of see how that might not work for us. So it becomes very important for us to practice presence in any way that we possibly can. And there are a lot of ways to do that. So if you want to be really, really good at, playing guitar, what do you do? And most people would answer, well, you practice. Many hours of practice. If you want to be really, really good at playing tennis, have that amazing backhand muscle memory, what do you do? Well, again, you would practice. Whatever it is that we want to be really good at and be able to do over and over to where it becomes almost automatic for us, we would practice. So if you want to be really, really good at being present and not lost in a story of suffering, and if you are suffering, you're in a story, but only always, because there's what is, and then there's our story about what is. So it becomes very important for us to have a way to practice. At the same time, there are often a lot of things that make people not successful meditators. Sometimes it's, a belief system. Sometimes it's just, the brain is conditioned to do what it normally does. And if it's conditioned to be in a story of suffering, often we have to bring, very specific levels of consciousness to this process, becoming aware of what's actually going on, acknowledging what's actually here and accepting kind of what's here, where often we have to be with something before we can move away from it. That's a trauma rule. What we resist persists. So there are contraindications for mindfulness, specifically that you don't necessarily hear about. One is, whenever we've been through trauma or some form of emotional conditioning, often that involves some form of fight, flight, freeze, or disconnection of the autonomic nervous system. So specifically disconnection or disassociation can be a sometimes a contraindication. So we need to know that, because there is a way for us to approach that and to work with that before we step into a practice of presence. And a lot of that has to do with when we begin bringing our attention to how we're holding things in the body. And we're going to talk a lot about this in how we process trauma, but just in the practice of presence, for example, if we begin bringing your attention to your breath or to a body scan or something that's in the now, and the body keeps score, and that's where you actually keep the pain, but you were able to condition disconnecting from that a long time ago, disassociation, as a protective mechanism. Well, if suddenly you become really uncomfortable by paying attention in a new way, that you're connecting with that pain, you're not going to want to do that for very long. So we need to know that that's coming. We need to set some parameters, and we need to show people how to begin melting the blocks. And there's different stages of what we call the different stages of silence, of how we negotiate with the body, how we negotiate with the mind, that becomes very, very helpful in our ability to begin practicing presence in a way that can completely transform. And it's such a pleasure to watch people that didn't think they could do something begin to have brain changes to where they begin seeing life. Like they're like, oh my God, that leaf, it has like 16 colors of green in it. The art of living life. And this is what we're talking about. How do you begin practicing actually being and tasting your life, as opposed to being in a story of it? So this is what practicing presence is all about. And we are delighted to help you find your language, your way. That's what that particular pillar of coaching is all about. So we'll talk to you about that soon. Take care, guys.